Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jorgio Castro. I'm a senior staff attorney at Bay Area Legal Aid, and I'm also serving as operations co-director on the board of the Filipino Bar Association of Northern California, or FBANC, this year. This is going to be a Know Your Rights informational seminar on Social Security benefits, specifically SSI and SSDI, as well as a state benefit, which is very similar, if not identical in many aspects, CAPI. So this is an informational seminar, so none of this constitutes legal advice, and my presentation and your participation here does not create an attorney-client relationship between us. This is really just a general overview and background information about the programs and your rights, some important points to consider, and places you could go to get information later on. So with that, let me please share the screen here so you can see the presentation. All right. So let us get started. A little bit more about the organization I work for, which has helped provide this presentation and provides Social Security representation services to a number of people. Bay Area Legal Aid provides low-income clients in 7 Bay Area counties with free civil legal aid assistance in a multitude of practice areas. Social Security is a part of the public benefits advocacy that Bay Legal does. There's also consumer law, housing law, family law units and divisions, and there are other groups focused on different client populations, whether it's youth or reentry or veterans. So the legal advice line is there and available. If you are a resident of one of the 7 Bay Area counties in which Bay Legal operates, you can call that number. And if you have any legal issue, if it's within Bay Area Legal Aid's ability, you can possibly seek representation. If not, it is possible to get information as well as a referral to other resources. So there's that legal advice line. There's also the Health Consumer Center number that you can see on the screen here, 855-693-7285. And that is for any health care issues that someone may have. So it could be with a private health care issue with an insurance company. It could be a public health care issue with Medicare or Medi-Cal or the VA. It could relate to coverage or non-coverage, different kinds of benefits within a specific health insurance coverage, a wide variety of areas. So you could give them a call. And our San Francisco office, where I'm located, is on Market Street. There's the address number there. All right, moving on to the next slide. So why are Social Security benefits important? Well, there's a number of reasons why. I think first and foremost, it's a stable source of income for people when they are unable to work full time because of a disability. Also, there are a number of other benefits. There's health insurance that is tied to the Social Security benefit, specifically Medi-Cal for SSI recipients and Medicare for SSDI recipients. And I should just back up 1 second. When talking about SSI and SSDI, the two programs um, are very similar, and I'll go into it in the next slide. But it's just that one is for people who are low income and low assets, regardless of their work history, and the other is for people who have sufficient work history to be covered under that program. So that's just the only real difference between those two programs to keep in mind. So why else are these benefits important? They provide links to in-home support services for people, such that you could get an IHSS uh, worker to assist with the activities of daily living. They provide connection to vocational rehabilitation through the State Department of Rehabilitation. And there's also work incentive programs to help get people back into the workforce if possible. These benefits are a good backup plan if you're unsuccessful in employment due to disability. If someone is trying and just can't for whatever reason because of their disabilities, this is a safety net measure that's in place for exactly those cases. Also, there have been studies that have shown that Social Security disability benefits in particular and cash benefits such as Social Security decrease rates of recidivism into prison and jail, emergency room visits and usage, and other crisis visits, uh, ambulance services, urgent care visits, um, police interactions, mobile crisis visits. So there's a wide variety of stabilizing effects that these benefits can provide. Um, these benefits provide a stabilization of income and access to health care, improves well-being of clients, and can lead to their eventual return to work. So um, that's a big one. Is really just providing people with sort of regular healthcare coverage and some regular income has a very positive effect on their overall wellness and increases the chances that they actually can eventually return to work. And also, these programs save money for counties. I mentioned all the decreased usage of county services like jails and emergency rooms in public hospitals and county emergency services, first responder services. There's sort of a wide variety of these secondary effects when people are connected to a benefit like this. So we'll go to the next slide. What are Social Security benefits? So, as I mentioned, there's SSI and there's SSDI. SSI, that's the benefit of last resort for people who are disabled or aged 65 or over who meet a resource limit and income limit. And right now, the resource limit is $3,000 and the income limit is going to be, well, the resource limit is actually $2,000 for an individual, $3,000 for uh, a couple, and the income limit is the monthly amount there shown on the screen. SSDI is basically the same type of a benefit. You have to prove disability in the same way. It's just that SSDI comes from the insurance fund that we're all paying into when we're working, and an SSDI tax is being taken out of the regular paycheck. The amount of SSDI that you qualify for varies depending on how much you earned and how recently you worked. And it's, a calculation. We don't have to get into that here, but that's just something to keep in mind. So that's why SSDI benefits will vary. Some people can have a very small SSDI benefit because they, did not earn large amounts of money when they were working. Maybe they were only working part-time over a period of time. And some people could have a much higher amount if they, did have a very high salary position prior to becoming disabled. Also, someone can be eligible for SSDI even if they themselves don't have their work history that's sufficient, if they have a parent who is either disabled or retired or deceased, and the person who's applying had their disability start prior to the age of 22, or when they were essentially considered a child. And this is called the disabled adult child benefit. And so that uses the SSDI benefit of their parent who's disabled or retired or deceased. So those are the two benefits. Now let's talk about what the process looks like for applying and appealing, whether that's yourself or if you're representing somebody and advocating on their behalf in front of Social Security as their authorized representative. So there is an initial application you file for either SSI or SSDI, or possibly both if you think you're entitled to both. And Social Security will take that application and process it and make a determination. They take in all the forms that you fill in, and there are a lot of forms, and they'll take in the request medical records from the places that you identify as having those records, and they'll basically have their contracted medical doctor and psychologist or psychiatrist evaluate both mental and physical conditions and disabilities in order to make a determination. And so that determination is the initial decision that you'll get back. And the agency has released numbers. They release numbers every year of how many people are approved at each stage. So at the initial stage, only about 39% of people were approved last year. And that was actually somewhat of an increase from the prior year of 31%, I believe. So as you can see, there's a large number of people who are denied initially, even though there are far more than the 39% who would meet Social Security's definition of disability. This is just sort of a function of how the Social Security process works, in that there are a large number of cases that get denied for various reasons in the beginning. And they will have to be appealed up in order to um, essentially get more evidence and perhaps get it into in front of a judge. So the next stage up is what we call reconsideration. There, around 15% of cases were allowed here, so that still means 85% were denied at this point. Now, again, at the reconsideration level, it's still the same process as at the initial level. It's still the same kind of um, evaluation process that's still done by a medical doctor and a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And the Social Security is still kind of doing the same thing. They're just doing it again, but with different people and looking at the record and any additional information you give them at that time. So if you're denied at that point and you appeal, you go up to an administrative law judge hearing. And this is the area where we see like a lot of cases getting approved, or a lot more getting approved. 45% allowance rate at the ALJ hearing level, and that actually goes up to 80% if the person is represented by somebody at the ALJ hearing level, typically an attorney who practices in this area, because it can be very complicated, and you really need an attorney who knows what they're doing at this level, or a representative, because there can be representatives who aren't licensed barred attorneys. They can still be representatives for the Social Security disability purpose application process. But you just need, it really is very important to get somebody who really knows what they're doing in terms of representing you at this level in order to give yourself the best chance of succeeding, having your claim succeed. And it's also at this point that there are a lot of attorneys in the private bar who take cases at private law firms, and is also a place where attorneys could take on cases pro bono, certainly for individuals who need representation. Now, so the judge is going to look through all of these, all through the records. You're going to take testimony from the claimant in person at a hearing, a formal hearing, and they'll issue their own decision. If that decision is unfavorable, then you go up to the appeals council, if you would want to consider pursuing the appeal. And the appeals council is a national sort of body out on the East Coast, in the Washington, D.C. area. They allow / remand only about 14% of cases. So as you can see here, it's a very low possibility of getting the appeals council to either allow or remand your case back to the ALJ to say, the ALJ did something improper here and they need to do something differently in their hearing or with their decision. So we typically see just a lot of rote denials at the appeals council level. If you're denied here, that's the last level within Social Security. Now you can appeal to federal district court and essentially sue the Social Security Administration in federal court, right? And so at that level, you can see here we have a much higher rate of success nationally at getting cases either allowed or remanded back to the agency because there was an error of law or some kind of abuse of discretion. 62% is a pretty high allowance / remand rate. So I think this goes to show that if your case is denied initially, that doesn't mean that you aren't disabled and that you don't meet the standard for Social Security. Unfortunately, the system is imperfect and flawed in a lot of ways, and it might just be a case of appealing and sort of fighting your way through with a representative or on your own. So with that, let's go to the next slide. Now, the SSI process. This gives you kind of a timeline of what to expect right now. Social Security as a federal agency is extremely backlogged in terms of just processing cases at all different levels right now. So right now, after an initial application, individuals are waiting 6 to 12 months for a decision back from the agency. At the reconsideration level, you're waiting an additional 6 to 12 months at least. It could be longer depending on the state that you're in. At the hearing level, if you file a hearing request, you're waiting 9 to 18 months for a hearing before an ALJ or administrative law judge. At the appeals council level, it could be a wait for up to 2 years. I think typically more we see decisions in about a year time frame, maybe a little bit over a year. It could be up to 2 years though in some cases right now. And if you file a case at federal district court, that process could take up to a year. Again, this is sort of like the longer end of the timeline. There are certainly cases that get resolved sooner than that at the district level because they could just be sent back. You could have the opposing counsel agree to a voluntary remand, and they'll just agree to send it back to the agency with certain instructions, and so that would shorten that time. So again, these are estimates and averages. The exact number is really going to depend on the state that you're in, or it'll depend on the judge that you get assigned, which you don't really have a lot of control over. And so there's just like a lot of, unfortunately, patience that's required and waiting that's required, which is very difficult for people, understandably. If they're disabled, they can't work full time. So, that's definitely something to keep in mind if you're representing somebody in this process. They're going to have to try to find ways to make ends meet and essentially survive while they're going through this, waiting for a decision. All right. So what does it mean to be disabled for the purposes of Social Security? Well, I'll just keep it simple here and talk about the adult disability criteria. Those are exactly the same for both SSI and SSDI, right? And the definition is the inability to do any substantial gainful activity by reason of any medically determinable physical or mental impairment which has lasted or can be expected to last for a continuous period of not less than 12 months or result in death. So that's kind of a long standard. But that is Social Security's definition of disability. So it's kind of specific, um, and so being disabled for purposes of Social Security does not mean someone's not able to do any work at all or not able to do anything at all. You don't need to be just completely incapacitated. It's really that you can't do what Social Security considers substantial gainful activity, which is sort of very roughly, very loosely tied to the idea of like working full time or kind of close to full time in order to support yourself. So, how does Social Security make the determination about whether you meet or don't meet this standard? Well, they employ a 5-step sequential disability evaluation process here. And so I'll run through the steps with you. The first step is they ask the question if you're engaged in substantial gainful activity. Now, substantial gainful activity is essentially a dollar amount, which changes every year. Basically goes up to the inflation. And in this year, the substantial gainful activity amount is $1,550 in the month. So if you're earning that amount or more, under Social Security's rules, you are not disabled. Now, I'm just keeping it very simple here. There are exceptions to this. If the work is, if basically if there's something about the work where it's what Social Security would consider a sheltered work, where you're getting a lot of support, and it's sort of can be viewed almost as a make work program where there's a lot of training, a lot of support, a lot of slack given, um, then that might not actually be the amount of money that you're earning for Social Security's purposes. They might actually view the amount as lower. And there's other things to consider too. So if your work is such that you're getting a lot of like special accommodations, or there are a lot of things going on where it's not sort of what we consider a normal competitive employment position, then you may still want to consult with somebody to see whether or not this is um, whether or not you could still be below the substantial gainful activity threshold, because that's something like a professional, an expert in this area would have to take a look at and assess all the facts around your situation. So just assuming that you don't make that much money at all, and that's not an issue, you go to step 2. And step 2 is Social Security asking, does the claimant have a severe impairment? And severe impairment for Social Security's purposes is very minimal. It really just has to be some kind of diagnosable medical condition that has more than a minimal effect on some part of your functioning. So it's a very low threshold to meet, um, and it's very rare for any case to end at step 2. Typically, there are diagnosable impairments that have some effect, some impact on your ability to function. So if you meet that de minimis step, we go to step 3, and that is, does the claimant have an impairment that meets or equals a listed impairment? So Social Security has what they call listings, where they've described certain conditions, medical conditions, and sort of like objective measurements for meeting that condition. And so if the medical evidence uh, and or doctors' opinions show that your medical condition fits into one of these listings, then you'll be found disabled at this level. And the process stops and you're found disabled. So that's going to be, there are various conditions where there might be different kinds of tests of functioning. Like, for example, with COPD, there are lung tests that can measure functioning of the lungs and sort of how much oxygen they can take in and respirate over time. And if it's below a certain amount, then you would be able to meet the listing for that condition, and Social Security would find you disabled. Now, if you don't meet the listing, Social Security wouldn't find you disabled right then and there, right? The process continues. And so then the next step is, well, right before they get to step 4, Social Security takes this information and they basically come up with a functioning profile of what they think your functioning is now, what they think the claimant's functioning is now, in terms of like what can they lift, what can they carry, how far can they walk, sit, stand, how, what are their limitations mentally in terms of paying attention, in terms of interacting with others, in terms of managing themselves, et cetera, et cetera. And so once they create that profile at step 4, they'll say, okay, now given this profile, can this person with this profile return to your past relevant work? And what Social Security will do is they'll typically have an expert in the field of jobs, a vocational expert, who will take that information and provide an answer. It typically doesn't happen at the lower levels. It typically only happens at the ALJ level. And so sort of another reason why there's a much higher disapproval rate at the earlier levels. But so Social Security will basically figure out, can you do your past relevant work? If you were working previously as a carpenter, given what your functioning is now that we've determined in terms of lifting, carrying, walking, standing, paying attention, all that stuff, can you still do that? And they have a textbook essentially that they rely on principally that's very outdated, called the Dictionary of Occupational Titles, but that's what Social Security is still using by law and regulation in order to figure out, can you return to this past relevant work? If you can, if that profile with all those limitations can return to the past relevant work, you're not disabled. Social Security will say you can still work. And that's even if that job doesn't exist anymore, which is kind of hard to believe, but it's true. If you did a past job, past relevant work that doesn't exist anymore, but in theory you could still do that work, then Social Security would find you not disabled. It's a whole nother issue. But let's say that Social Security says, okay, you can't return to your past relevant work. Then we go to step 5. And at step 5 level, it's can an individual with that set of functional limitations do any type of work that exists in significant numbers in the national economy? And this is also a question that really only comes up at the ALJ level, and Social Security will rely on a vocational expert to take that profile and essentially use vocational expert tools in order to come up with an answer to that question, whether someone with that profile can find other work, can participate in, can do other jobs in a national economy. And of course, if the finding is yes, then you're not disabled. If they say that you could be, you know, a retail clerk or customer service representative, and these are sort of specific jobs from the Dictionary of Occupational Titles, where they have they sort of lay out exactly what this job entails, what kind of strength requirements there are, what kind of requirements there are in terms of interacting with others, managing yourself, et cetera, et cetera. So if you can do any of those other jobs, a significant number of them, then you're not disabled. If the VE says that the profile, if you that you can't meet that profile, that that profile won't be able to work those jobs, then you're disabled, and then you would win there at step 5. Okay, that was a lot. That was a mouthful. All right, let's go. The next thing I want to touch on is drug addiction and alcoholism, as Social Security looks at it in relation to disability. So for Social Security now, currently, you must show, if there's evidence of drug abuse and alcoholism in your medical record, right, which basically means a diagnosis of substance abuse of some kind, then the evidence has to show that it's not material to your disability, that it's not essentially causing you to be so disabled that you can't work full time. So this does not mean that somebody has to be, quote, clean and sober to qualify. It does not mean that you cannot be found disabled if you have a substance use disorder, or if your client does. It just means that the key question is, would that person still be disabled if they stop using drugs and alcohol or alcohol? Is it the usage that is causing this level of disability? So Social Security will evaluate which limitations would remain if the person were to stop using drugs or alcohol, and then determine whether those remaining set of limitations are disabling. And so you'll ask, well, how do they determine which limitations would remain? Essentially, they would look to medical opinions as to how much the substance use is affecting them. That's one thing that's an important factor. They will also look at the record as a whole, and whether there are periods of sobriety, essentially where somebody is not using, and if the functioning level appears to be better during that period of time, then that might be a cause for them to find that your substance use is a material factor. It's causing the high level of disability. It's also kind of a murky area where there's a lot of guidance to Social Security, to judges and adjudicators in Social Security to figure this out. So there's a lot of guidance they're supposed to follow. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, right? And if they don't, that's often a basis to appeal. And so that's just something to keep in mind. The drug and alcohol use does not automatically mean that somebody is not disabled. It's really a more nuanced question that Social Security has to engage in. Next slide. So the role of an SSI advocate, whether you are the advocate or you're the claimant and you're looking to get an advocate. So principally, the role of the SSI advocate is to represent the client's expressed interest in obtaining benefits. Right, so the client has set the goal that they want to get benefits because they believe that they're disabled. Your role as the advocate is to assist and advocate for that client in pursuing benefits. So that entails explaining the process to the client, to the individual, navigating the process often on behalf of the individual, because there are a lot of points where things are going to need to be submitted, or there's going to need to be more information provided to Social Security. That's where an advocate comes into play. And just sort of navigate the different requirements that Social Security has at different levels for your case, and sort of advise your client on outcomes. What are the possible outcomes of your case, and basically what to expect. Another thing that an SSI advocate does is it provides an individual with stress relief. Essentially, the advocate is the one who's interacting with Social Security and the administration on all the individuals there almost exclusively, so that the clients don't have to actually think about it while they're dealing with their medical issues and medical treatment and other things going on in their life, right? You can just tell Social Security to talk to your lawyer. And in fact, they're supposed to only talk to your lawyer first. So an individual can just focus on other things while the advocate focuses on their case. An advocate can also help a client to get into treatment to develop medical evidence. This is really important. In our work, we're working primarily with people who are unhoused or who have unstable housing, and they oftentimes have trouble engaging or staying engaged with healthcare for various reasons, whether it's not being on the insurance plan that they can get on, or not being connected to a primary care provider, or just sort of not being able to get to their appointments. So that's a lot of the work that Bay Legal does, and other similar organizations who might do similar work. But it can just be helpful to have an advocate talk to the client about the kinds of treatment and evidence that's needed to build their case for Social Security. An advocate will have that expertise and knowledge about what needs to get into the record in order to give the client the best chance of being approved, or for them to have any chance of being approved, right? An advocate will also obtain letters, examinations, and medical questionnaires from treatment providers. So, this can be requesting the medical records and submitting them to Social Security and making sure Social Security gets them, and making sure Social Security gets all of them from all of the sources. Since, oftentimes people have gone treatment at various locations, different hospitals, emergency rooms, medical centers, clinics. So it takes time and energy and effort and sometimes money to actually put together that evidence, all of it, and submit it. So that's what an advocate does. Social Security does request medical records, but they're much more limited in what they request. They only request records that you tell them about. So you have to tell them, written, where to go to get records, and then they will submit something, and it's typically just for the time period at issue, from where you're saying your disability started to the present, and that's the time period that they'll request records from. Or they might go back a year at most. They're typically not requesting any further back than that. And a lot of times clients have issues that have been going on for years, right? It could be a chronic issue that's just gotten worse over time, or multiple issues that were coming up and have sort of like come together where they've gotten worse over time. So all of that background information is important and needed. But Social Security won't request all that information on their own. That's where an advocate comes into play. And also obtaining all of the questionnaires and exams from treatment providers, basically those doctor opinions, which can carry a lot of weight at Social Security and really make your case. An advocate is in a good position to try and talk to your healthcare providers, try to get the specific information in a specific format for Social Security. So advocates help clients win their SSI case, and this includes actually representing them in front of an ALJ at a hearing, or at the appeals council, or at federal district court with a federal judge, or even the Ninth Circuit, as some cases could get appealed up that far. So that's everything that an advocate does. So in our practice, we have social workers within our team that function as case managers in some way for clients. Also, many times the clients, because they're in sort of the county homeless response system, they may have a case manager of some kind attached to where they're currently staying, whatever kind of short-term shelter it is, or supportive housing unit. Or you or the client may have a case manager through their healthcare provider. In any of these cases, a case manager can be very helpful and very supportive. Right? They can refer clients for advocacy services. They can help the clients connect with medical care. That's something our social worker team does a lot. Remind them of appointments, provide transportation and support to get to appointments. They can also help clients connect with other necessary services, whether it's needing to obtain important identification documents like ID, driver's license, birth certificate, immigration documents, whether it's you know, trying to connect to resources available for food banks, pantries, dining kitchens, or low cost transportation options, uh, or just sort of information about any other services that might be out there. They're very helpful for that. They can also write statements to support or fill out forms to provide more information about the client's functioning. Um, this can be helpful for Social Security, um, just to get that into the record, particularly if maybe there isn't that much evidence in the record already from medical treatment. Case managers can help the client stay in touch with the client's attorney to share contact information and updates about the case. They can really facilitate that, which can be important depending on the client's disabilities. And they also provide moral support during the long wait for benefits, right? So if you think back to the slides at the beginning, this is a really long process, unfortunately. And it's one in which individuals have to sort of find a way to support themselves and survive while it's going on in the background of their lives, right? So it's important to have resources that can help if you're in that situation, or to connect uh, the client with those resources if you're assisting them with an SSI, SSDI CAPI application. So that is pretty much it. And I'll wrap up here, and I'll just leave this information up. And if there are any questions, feel free to type them in the chat. Let me just give you a minute here and take a look. Okay. All right, so I don't see any questions here in the chat. So I think that will conclude this presentation. So I just want to thank you for attending, and I wish you the best of luck with your Social Security disability case or CAPI case, or if you're working with somebody, I wish you and them the best of luck moving forward. Take care and Godspeed. Bye.